Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. I am a licensed real estate broker right here in Silicon Valley, California, ready to help you with your buying, selling, or investing needs anywhere in Santa Clara County. You can find me at soldbyrobert.com. But today we're going to talk about an interesting decision that was recently handed down relating to commissions and real estate agents. And this is a subject that's come up lots and lots. So we're going to cover it. I want to make sure you guys have a complete understanding of this because the verdict in my mind indicates a lack of understanding about how this works. And I'm not real sure how we get to a point where after hearing both sides present this, anyone would conclude what ended up being the verdict here. Whether you're talking about what's best for the consumer or any of these other things, the only fault that you can point to in this is going to be how realtors communicate commission charges to clients, and we can cover that. So if you're a real estate agent, you're definitely going to want to listen to this. And if you're a seller, you're going to want to listen to this too, because the commissions part of this is covered in your listing agreement. And I'm going to go over it. I want to make sure everybody understands. There is nothing crazy happening here. And this is the way I hate to be the guy who says this is the way it is because that's the way it's always been. Because as you know from past shows, I'm not a guy who subscribes to the idea that just because something's been done a certain way for a certain amount of time, that it should continue to be done that way. But this is the best way to do this, the way we've been doing it, the way that's just been struck down by a court. Despite that decision, the current way of doing it is the best way to do it. So let's first hit the news item here. Home sellers win a $1.8 billion judgment after jury finds conspiracy among realtors. And this is now being interpreted as a general impeachment of how commissions are handled in the world. And again, we're going to get into that. And I highlighted a few tidbits here so we can comment about it. Basically, it comes down to the National Association of Realtors and several brokerages were ordered to pay damages to home sellers who said they were forced to pay excessive fees to real estate agents. And we have to make sure we understand what the word forced means. Nobody was forced to do anything. There was a listing agreement. They went over the listing agreement, and then both parties signed it, meaning the brokerage signed it and the seller signed it. Forced, I think in this case, may reflect a real estate agent not treating the discussion of the commission as a very negotiable number. Now, for me, it's a negotiable number market-wide because every number is negotiable. Just like your asking price is negotiable once you put it on the market. You may ask for $1 million for your house, but no one might be willing to pay more than $800,000, so you may end up having to take that $800,000, right? So in terms of force, I don't think that's the right word. There may have been a feeling on the part of the seller that there was no negotiation happening or that they hadn't made a decision on the maximum commission they wanted to pay. But as the real estate person on the other side, I can tell you there are people who simply will not work for below a certain compensation level. I'm one of those people. I'm not going to list and sell your home for 1%. I'm just not going to do it. The amount of risk involved, the amount of cost involved on my end, it simply doesn't make it worth it to do 1%. And they're typically, and here's the part that gets tough, there typically is a lack of focus, quality, and attention the lower you are paying on the commission scale, right? And a lot of that ends up being an a la carte thing where a real estate agent may say, we'll put you on the MLS, but we're not going to do all these other things. And they charge you maybe a flat fee or a very low commission, but you're not going to get any of the expertise that you should expect from somebody. And you're getting what you're paying for at that point. On the flip side of that equation, I know of plenty of agents that are insisting on a full, and just to keep in mind, there is a split that happens, right? So when you as a seller are paying a commission, that whole commission does not go to your agent. Some half or some percentage of that commission also goes to the buyer's agent. So it's the full boat of the commission that's getting paid by the seller through the listing agreement. And I think that makes sense for it to live. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail here in a minute to sort of explain why I think that makes sense. The federal jury ruled on Tuesday that the powerful National Association of Realtors and several large brokerages had conspired to artificially inflate the commissions paid to real estate agents, a decision that could radically alter the home buying process in the United States. So, yes, that to call it a conspiracy is an interesting thing. And again, it may hinge more on how the discussion relating to commissions during the listing presentation was handled. I mean, I know I've always, since I started in the business back in 1988, have always pointed out that there is no legal requirement on what commissions should or shouldn't be. And I agree that that is something that should be negotiated between the parties. But there should be a full conversation about how, just because I say my commission, my personal commission is, let's just say I ask for 6%, and I give 3% to myself and 3% to the buyer's agent for bringing the buyer to the transaction. That historically was pretty typical. For a long time, agents really phrased it like, this is just what we charge. This is what gets charged, as if it was just what happens. And the conversation needs to be, if you don't want to pay that commission, you can absolutely pay less. But then the discussion becomes, will I accept less, or do you need to talk to a different agent? Right? I mean, that's the dimension that we need to get to. And you as a real estate agent, if I've got a real estate agent out there listening, I know I have tons of you who listen because plenty of you reach out after some of my podcasts and yell at me about things. You need to make it absolutely clear that if your client, if your person you're talking to who wants to list their home doesn't want to pay the commission that you've decided is what you work for, you can let them know they can work with a different agent. You need to be very open about that. There is no law, there is no rule that says that the commission needs to be what you say it is. Going on with the article here, it's a decision that has potential to rewrite the entire structure of the real estate industry in the United States, lowering the cost of moving homes by reducing commissions and that's not true. That is not going to happen. There will always be commissions. The only downside here is it may shift the burden of commissions to the buyers, which would absolutely be a terrible thing for the market. If you were suddenly to tell buyers that in addition to all the things they have to do in relating to loans and points and interest rates, now they have to pay, let's pretend the number goes lower. Let's say 1.5 to 2.5 or 3% additionally to get buyer representation for an agent. How does that even work? That doesn't end up being a situation that actually gets homes sold. The National Association of Realtors rule home seller is required to pay commissions to the agent representing the buyer, which sellers claimed forced them to pay excessive fees to the agents. No. The argument that I heard when I was listening to interviews relating to this was, why am I as the seller paying the buyer's agent when they bring no value to me? Well, of course they bring value. They bring the person who's going to buy your house. They bring the person who's going to go into debt by hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are very specific jobs being covered by this commission structure. The seller is out there marketing it, and if we want to summarize 100 different things into one thing, it's eyeballs. Your agent is supposed to get eyeballs on your property, and those eyeballs are supposed to get dazzled by what they put out there to get your property sold. As part of that effort, the effort is to draw leads, to draw buyers who have clients, to draw buyers agents who have clients to buy your house. So absolutely the buyer's agents have value. They are working with buyers. They are giving them updates on what properties are available, including yours, Mr. Seller, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. So this weird claim that seemed to carry a lot of weight in this trial, that why are sellers paying buyers agents because they don't bring the sellers any value, is in my mind completely invalid. And the bottom line is, if we try to shift this cost to buyers, it's going to do more harm to the market than you can imagine. And ultimately, sellers would still have to pay simply by reducing their prices. They'd have to drop their price 3%, right? Because or in order to compensate the buyer's agents who are now separately charging a fee to buyers. It indicates a complete lack of understanding of the dynamics of how this business works, not only on the part of the people prosecuting the case, but on the part of the lawyers for the National Association of Realtors. Now, of course, This is absolutely Monday morning quarterbacking. I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't hear the arguments, but all I can judge by is the outcome. And this seems like certain key things were not discussed clearly enough in order for the jury to really understand how this works. Under the verdict, the sellers would no longer be required to pay their buyers' agents. Well, you're not technically required to do it now. As I said, these things are all negotiable. And you can absolutely list a home where the buyer's compensation is $0 or 0%. You're just never going to sell that house. It's never going to go. You'd have to go in there and say, hey, any clients, any buyers who come along are going to have a separate agreement with their buyer's agent for their compensation. And again, that simply does not work. And I don't think we think of this as the sellers paying the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. They think of this as they are paying the seller's agent a commission to sell their house. And as a separate thing, the listing agent is then offering a part of that commission to the buyer's agent to bring buyers to the transaction. So I realize that there's court cases that contradict this idea, but I think the way to think about it is it's the listing agent paying the buyer's agent rather than the seller paying it. And I realize that just puts a middleman between the seller and the buyer's agent. But in terms of understanding where the money gets spent and why it is being spent wisely, hinges on that mentally grasping the process in that way. Let's see here. On Tuesday morning, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, an 8-person jury delivered the verdict. Yes, there had been a conspiracy, and not only were the defendants be required to pay damages, but those damage could triple. So the treble damages part is insane. We'll see how this goes. This is not a settled argument, right? The National Association of Realtors has appealed it. My guess is that as things move on, this will end up not changing much because I would love to hear from you. I've tried to think through what would be a smarter way to manage commissions. Is there a better way to do it? Making those commissions burdened on the buyer is not the solution, right? I think that in terms of keeping the commissions as non-negative to the process as possible, it makes sense for those to be spelled out in the listing agreement and completely spelled out, right? So that it's not something that gets negotiated down the road, but right there at the front, right there at the listing appointment. But do you think there's a better way? Comment below. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening via iTunes or iHeartRadio or whatever else, feel free to go to soldbyrobert.com and comment where the show is posted. I would love to get your feedback on this one. The article goes on to say, now how the ruling plays out remains to be seen, but it's clear that the verdict and the size of the damages point to a shift in the way agent commissions are now paid. Redfin, which earlier this month exited the National Association of Realtors, said that the decision will prompt home buyers and home sellers to now question the standard practice of setting commissions between 5 and 6%. Standard practice does not equal force, right? There are a variety of reasons why commissions tend to be in that range. One is, as a real estate agent, how much do you value the product that you bring? And for me, the math is relatively easy. If you are someone who outperforms the typical sales numbers in your marketplace by 3, 4, 5%, well, you're already bringing more to the table than you're taking, right? The goal here, if you're a real estate agent, your goal should be to be bringing more value in what's happening in the transaction than you're taking out in terms of a cash payment through commission. That should always be the goal. That equals you getting more eyeballs, potentially getting multiple offers, and therefore getting a higher sales price. So if on average a home sells for about asking price, let's say 100% of asking price, but on average your homes sell for 103, 105, 106%, well, then you're already beating the market on average by an amount that compensates the seller's expense by what you're charging. If you sell your homes faster than everybody else, that reduces holding charges on the part of the seller, right? So these are metrics you should be using to measure yourself. And I realize the real estate industry does not do this. It's something that annoys the heck out of me, and I've done tons of shows about it. But there are plenty of metrics to measure that actually define whether or not you are good at your job as a real estate agent. And these are things I share with sellers. When you're interviewing real estate agents, check my past podcast, check for articles on the website, soldbyrobert.com. Things to define whether or not you are working with an agent who really earns their commission. There are some agents who absolutely don't, and that's a bad thing, but you got to do your due diligence and do a little research on these folks to figure out if there's someone you want to work with. But none of this spells a better home buying environment for anybody. It does not equal more affordable housing. It does not equal better service from the real estate industry. In fact, if anything, it pushes lowest common denominator, which will have you end up working more likely with agents who have to worry about quantity over quality, which is a negative in terms of what you want out of your transaction as a seller or a buyer. And nothing deserves the more focused attention of your real estate agent more than what is in your life likely the biggest asset you own and the biggest expense of your life. Just to go on here, it's also possible that buyers will become the ones who decide how much to pay a buyer's agent. That sounds good. Let the buyers decide. But if they decide, they pay it. And it's not an invisible thing to them. It ends up being a line item, which will reduce offer prices. And particularly today, with interest rates around 8%. Now, granted, 8% is not the universal thing that's going to happen forever. Interest rates could go up from here and make it even worse, or they could go down. But the point is, with an additional there are enough financial strains and line items on the buyer in a very limited money available scenario today. There's already plenty. Let's not add another one. Let's settle this in the discussion that relates to when the home gets listed. I don't think I had anything else. There was one. There was a case in the U.S. District Court in Missouri. Other lawsuits are now imminent. Claims the practice of having home sellers pay sales commissions to buyers' agents is a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And I don't think I'm almost sure this argument has already been put through the courts. I seem to remember years and years ago that this was a thing. There was a huge legal challenge that challenged whether or not buyers should be paid by sellers. And I think it needs to be thought of as the seller not paying the buyer's agent. The seller is paying their agent. And then the seller's agent is deciding what to offer the buyer's agent when they come in. So think of it as the seller is paying an amount of money that represents the costs to market and sell their home. Part of selling their home is finding that buyer. Part of dealing with a buyer is letting them have representation of their own. And I firmly agree that buyers should not be represented by the same real estate agent, except under very unique circumstances. Now, that's called double ending or dual agency here in California. It is entirely legal, and it's legal in some other states, but not legal in all states. And I've had a few scenarios where all the details of a transaction were decided ahead of time, right? Maybe it was a divorce and it was relatively amicable and the parties had already decided this is what we're going to do. So they didn't want to have to pay huge amounts of money. So they just hired me. So they didn't have to pay what I would normally charge because I was quote unquote double ending it. I got to keep the entire commission. So the same rule applied. The seller was paying an amount of money to get their home sold. And one of the costs I did not have to incur in that scenario was paying a buyer's agent. So I was able to charge a lower commission. So the scenario is super important. What you're facing is super important. Whether you're a buyer, seller, or investor, making this a scenario where that cost gets transferred to the buyer is not a positive move for the market. Having any kind of government agency dictate what should or shouldn't get charged, because so much of this sort of slouches into that assumption that what we need to do is have more control over what commissions are charged, makes no sense at all. Now, in my case, I live in a market where the average home price is $1.2 million, $1.3 million. And the argument will be made, well, you're going to make an awful lot of money off of that transaction. That's not wrong, but also keep in mind that with those transactions carries a level of risk. If something happens very bad relating to that listing, whether someone claims fraud or all the myriad of different legal challenges someone might make, I'm taking a certain amount of risk as a real estate agent to sell that property, right? Because I'm managing the disclosures. I'm making sure all the things that need to get disclosed do get disclosed. And if there's a legal challenge to that, I end up getting hit with a lawsuit, and the lawsuit is going to be commensurate with the price of the home. If it's a $200,000 home, the lawsuit might be $20,000. If it's a $2 million home, that lawsuit might be $200,000 or $300,000 or $500,000. So the idea that there shouldn't be a relationship is a little bit nuts. And it's also a cost of living thing, right? When you are charging a percent of a commission, if you live in a community and you're serving it as a real estate agent, the cost of living here in California is insane. So we are professionally licensed folks who are providing a service, and the commission rate that we charge allows us to live in the community in which we serve. You can argue whether or not that makes a whole lot of sense. I personally think it makes sense. But again, understand it's totally negotiable. And this is the part where we come to something that real estate agents should have been doing all along. And the conspiracy part of this, the only way I can see the conspiracy part of this floating is if agents in their negotiations in a listing agreement were simply saying, this is it. And not only saying this is it, because it may be. If there is a this is it number for me. If I come into a scenario where someone wants to sell their property and they want me to list it for them, I'm going to have a number in my head that works for me and I'm willing to work for, and I'll have a number at which below I am not willing to work for you and do this job. But I need to communicate to you that I'm not the only agent out there. There may be an agent who is willing to work for less. But what you need to decide is someone else going to do as good a job? Because remember, you can think you're saving money by getting a lower commission on a real estate agent. But if that agent can show you that they outperform the market on a regular basis, that 5% you're paying or that 6% you're paying may actually save you money versus an agent who's only going to charge you 4%, because this agent's going to make up the difference in the amount of value they bring to the transaction. And remember, not only is there the financial part, like I discussed before, in terms of percent of asking price and holding costs by selling it faster, there's also the sanity part of this. And one of the things that an agent needs to bring to a transaction is calm and sanity. And buyers and sellers need to not be freaking out every minute with these gigantic numbers, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They need to know that it's being handled by someone who understands how the contract works, understands how deadlines work, has totally mapped out the life of this situation so that we understand when the disclosures are due. We understand when things need to get done. Everything gets done on time. They're good at babysitting lenders to make sure that those lending docs get in on time and that things get funded when they need to get funded, and that the coordination of escrow stays strong so that that moving truck that you've scheduled doesn't need to get rescheduled at the last minute because something got screwed up. Now, of course, there's always that rare situation where something completely out of your control happens. But the point is, all those things should be, the eye should be on the ball at all times. And the problem is, in a scenario where you reduce a real estate agent's ability to ask for the compensation they feel they deserve, you end up pushing real estate agents into a position where instead of focusing on doing 4 or 5 deals this month exceptionally well, or 2 deals this month, depending on the market, right? Whatever you are, versus doing 30 deals, right? And we have agents out there that are doing 30 deals. And let me make another suggestion to you as a seller. If you are interviewing an agent and they are bragging about doing 300 plus deals a year, that agent does not deserve, in my estimation, a elevated commission unless they can also prove to you that they beat the market, that they tend to get more for their properties, that they tend to sell their properties faster, that if they open an escrow, it closes, right? If they overperform in all those things and still manage to close over 300 escrows a year, great, fantastic. However, I've never found that to be the case. In every agent I've ever encountered who closes crazy amounts of properties per year, when I go and I look into their deals, I find far more canceled or expired listings. I find far fewer transactions where, in other words, they don't beat the average of the market. They either are right around the average of the market or in many cases are below it. And when you when you start to take into consideration what's happening in the market in general, right? Is it a very robust seller's market or a very robust buyer's market? And you sort of understand that, you realize that many of these agents are just riding the wave of what the market is doing versus anything they're bringing to the transaction. So just keep these things in mind. So the bottom line here is, yes, you should still as a seller be perfectly comfortable with simply paying and if you read the California listing agreement, the first thing that you see that defines what the commission is, it just says you will pay the broker a commission of X, whatever it is, 4%, 5%, 6%, 10%. I have in the past on certain properties charged a 10% commission. And then below that is the broker will be sharing with the buyer's agent this amount of that commission that you're paying to the brokerage. Now, I don't see that changing in California. I think that once this thing goes to a higher court, that method of paying commissions is going to be absolutely vindicated. But again, just because that's the way we've been doing it, and that's the way that makes the system work as well as it can, is it perfect? No, but I don't know of a better way. So if you have an idea for a better way, I would love to hear it. But what I don't want to hear are ideas that, well, we need to create a department of real estate commissions for the local, state, or national government. That one doesn't fly. Nothing breeds corruption into a system more than creating that kind of thing. So it would ultimately, I think, hurt buyers, sellers, and investors more than anything else. So that's it. That's sort of the exploration of this topic. I hope that it's been helpful for you. I had a completely different show plan, but once, and I had started actually doing it earlier in the week, but once this came down, this actually kind of blew me away. I had sort of peripherally been following this case and thought, yeah, we've had this discussion before, but no, this was different. And I'd love to find out the brokerages that were involved. What are the specific cases that were brought? And part of the California listing agreement actually spells out that, commissions are negotiable. So I don't get it. I don't understand the ground they're standing on. Maybe this is in other states where that's not as clear. But as we exit, sellers, simply make sure that you are comfortable that the agent you're hiring brings the value, and understand that nut you're paying in commission is designed to cover the whole process of getting your home sold, which includes a buyer's agent to represent them, and they deserve their own representation. So don't think of it as you're paying the buyer's commission. Think of it as you're paying your agent to do a job, and part of the job they're going to do is to pay the buyer's agent. Number one. Number two, real estate agents. Stop being idiots. Be absolutely upfront about commissions. There should be nothing more transparent in the conversation than what you're dealing with on commissions. And there's actually no rule that says you need to split that commission right down the center. You could give a lower commission rate to your client and have more of it be to you, or more of it be to the buyer's agent. The reason why those fields are there that aren't filled out is because they can be different numbers. So just use it that way. But also understand that you need to prove to sellers what value you bring. And please, don't always just bring that list of 22 things I'm going to do to sell your home, because every agent is doing that. Talk about how you do them differently. Talk about how you do them better, and prove that you do it better through numbers of past sales, because that's how you earn business. And if I had my way, that's how every seller would judge you. All right. I hope that's been helpful, folks. I hope this spurs a conversation. Feel free to comment, reach out to me directly. However, the goal here is to leave you with more knowledge on the table than I take up in your time, and I hope we've achieved that today. Thanks to all of you who are podcast listeners. I saw the numbers go up kind of dramatically last week. I'm not real sure why, but thank you very much for all my new listeners on the podcast. And for those of you enjoying this on YouTube, please do comment below. I do really value your input and feedback, so feel free to do that. And make sure to like and subscribe if you think this is even vaguely valuable information. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to y'all next time.